Ladies and gentlemen, friends, thank you for joining us today as we celebrate the life of a very special person, Joan Metcalf Schaefer. Aunt Joan, to her family here with us from Ohio and Massachusetts today, but Dean Joan to all of us here at USC, where she has been an integral part of this university since 1955. Dean Joan was the heart and soul of this university. We all have our Dean Joan stories, and we're going to hear from some of her friends and family shortly. But before we do that, I would like to thank a few people who have made this celebration possible. First, a very special thank you to Dean Amber Miller, the Dean of the Dornsife College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences, who is hosting this event for us today. The college held a very special place in her heart, in Joan's heart, and even though she originally was hired to work in student affairs, after her official retirement in 1992, she found a home in the college and served another 22 years plus in the college as a volunteer, continuing to advise students as well as serving for Phi Beta Kappa and, of course, the Cambridge program. For this, I want to thank Dean Miller and her predecessors, represented today by her Senior Associate Dean Eddie Sarton, along with Jennifer Dunn Greenspan, and especially the event staff, Cynthia Gellis, Stacy Cohn, and Elisa Ruiz. So many of you offered to help me today for this event, but I waved you off, thanked you, and let you know that it was already handled by very ably by the Dornsife team, and for that we are very grateful. So thank you, Dornsife, Cynthia, Elisa, Stacy, Eddie, everyone, thank you all for this today. When Joan officially retired in '92, a few of us got together and thought it would be a great idea to preserve Joan's legacy with a scholarship in her name. Our friends in the development office humored us, thinking at most we would raise maybe $100,000, maybe, and we'd be lucky to award a scholarship or two a year for a few years. Well, fast forward to today, as we begin the 25th anniversary of that scholarship, and thanks to many of you in this room today, that scholarship endowment exceeds $2 million. And since 1993, over $1.15 million in scholarships have been awarded to 324 USC students who have demonstrated a love of learning. You'll hear a little bit more about the scholarship later, but I would like to thank those members of the scholarship selection committee that are here today: Adina Savin, Matt Weir, Linda Barker, Mona Cravens, Charlotte Van Fleet, Carrie Hempel, Suzanne Nora Johnson, and especially the chair of the scholarship committee for the past few years, Sue Phelps. Now, I'd like to share a few stories about Joan of which you may not be aware. Joan was hired as Dean of Women by USC in 1955, along with her husband, who was hired as professor of music in the School of Music. But soon thereafter, her marriage ended. And as was the custom in those days, when a professional couple at the same institution no longer were a couple, it was expected that the woman was to leave the institution, not the man. So Dean Joan started looking for a new job, until one day, the new president of the university, Dr. Norman Topping, called her into his office and sat her down and said to her, "Joan, you're not going anywhere." And how fortunate are we? Within student affairs, as Dean of Women, she was advisor and confidant to thousands of students, both men and women. We have so many of you here today from New York, Atlanta, Utah, Iowa, her professional colleagues, advisees, neighbors, student workers, scholars, friends and family, and many students for whom she served as an advisor through Board to Board, Phi Beta Kappa, and a Cambridge program. Joan's first priority was, and always would be, the students. Her greatest joy was seeing the personal growth in a student. When she retired in '92, they abolished her position as Dean of Women. Who could possibly replace her? My friends at other universities told me after they had met her that they longed to have someone at their school in which they could confide. Now, Cambridge. You know she accompanied probably 30 students each year for a month during the summer to a college at Cambridge, University in England. That started in the mid-'60s, and she continued those yearly trips until the year 2006. She became such a part of the fabric of Cambridge as well, especially in the late 1960s, when the then chairman of USC Board of Trustees, Justin Dart, visited her and the USC students that summer. He privately noticed that all of the carpets in the college where the students were staying were in need of replacement. So when he got home, he paid for a new carpet throughout the entire college. And of course, each summer thereafter, when a Joan arrived in Cambridge, the fellows always asked about Mr. Dart and if he would be returning anytime soon. Joan lived in the same apartment in the Hollywood Hills from 1970 until her passing this year. For those who were invited into her inner sanctum, you were treated to the incredible views of Los Angeles, the observatory, the Hollywood Bowl, and her beautiful bonsai trees on the deck. For many years, Steve and Cheryl Mandela and Sue Phelps and I would buy a small Christmas tree at the local tree lot, bring it to her apartment, and help decorate it as we would enjoy some Christmas cheer. What many of you probably don't know about Joan, or maybe you did, is that she was very meticulous about her Christmas tree. Not just the ornament placement. I guess I could understand that. But the lights. Did you know that lights on a Christmas tree could be no farther away from each other than 1 inch? There could be no dark areas on the tree anywhere. And so after Steve and I had steadied the tree in the base, put on the lights, she would spend the next 2 hours rearranging the lights over and over again, while we just sat back and enjoyed the Christmas cheer. Speaking of Christmas, I know many of you received her annual Christmas letter. I started receiving them in the 1980s. I had no idea she had started sending those in the 1960s. For those interested, we have posted many of them on her website, deanjoan.net. And I want to thank Matt Hunter and his company, Hunter Communications, for designing and maintaining that website all these years. Finally, a few last thoughts. Finally, the last few years were tough on Joan. This was not the life she had wanted to live in her final years. Many of you continued to call and visit, but I want to thank a few who are who were there until the very, very end. Bruce Cohen, who came out from New York, and Joe Marie and Michael Riley, and their kids. One visit in particular, they're out there. They sent me a clip of their children playing the violin and guitar for Joan, and you could see Joan reveling in the music, even in her state. I want to thank her caregivers here today, Rose, Danielle, Lorraine, but especially Lorraine Logan, who spent 13 years with Joan and was with her at the very end. Lorraine, please stand up. Let us thank you for all you did for Dean Joan all those years. One of her former students, Paul Bell from Texas, couldn't be here today. I believe his daughter's here. Mallory's here someplace. There she is. Thank you, Mallory. Sent me a note this week about what words he would use to describe Joan and her legacy. I would like to end with those words now describing our Dean Joan. Spirited, thoughtful, interested, imaginative, passionate, kind, enabling, direct, and of course, elegant. Dean Joan was the heart and soul of this university and will remain so for me forever. Thank you, everyone, and now a few words from some of our other friends and family.
A little hoarse today. Excuse me. Joan Metcalf Schaefer. Not many of us knew her by that name. Not many of us knew she had any other name but Dean Joan. She was Dean Joan. She grew up in Toledo, Ohio, went to Miami University of Ohio, majored in music and English, got her doctorate in education from the University of Toledo, and then became Dean of Women at Carnegie Mellon University. And her next stop, USC. Dean Joan became involved with the students in the university life here immediately upon her arrival. She immediately became advisor to Mortar Board, of course. She had been a member of Mortar Board, and she remained so until 1992. She was elected to Phi Beta Kappa here in 1996 and remained their secretary until the mid-2000s. She became very involved in all activities in her early years that involved women, because she had been president of the Associated Women's Organization at Miami of Ohio. She spent much time visiting the dormitories and the sororities so she could get to know the girls individually. She had one of the biggest jobs on campus, and for those of you of that certain generation, she had to enforce the women's dress code. No shorts, no jeans, no long pants, no bare legs, and certainly no sandals. It was kind of a late preppy look that we wore then. She attended so many luncheons as an honored guest. She spoke at so many events with her elegant style and her beautiful, beautiful knowledge. As Jerry mentioned, she participated in scholarship interviews. She met with countless students, both young men and young women. She advised, she listened, she counseled, she taught, and most of all, she loved. And much to her delight, in 1966, she was asked to be Mistress of Ceremonies at Songfest. Oh my, what a wonderful honor for such a dynamic Trojan, and she was thrilled. I met Dean Joan a few days after she became Dean of Women here in September of 1955. I was a sophomore. I was an out-of-state student, and I had become friends with her predecessor, Dean White. I was very curious about this new dean and hoped beyond hope that she and I would become friends. I walked into her office, and I was greeted with a warm, gracious, loving smile. And she said, "Lorna, sit down and have a cup of tea." And thus began a long and beautiful friendship that lasted 62 years. There weren't many out-of-state students in those days. This was mostly a commuter school, and the weekends could be long and lonely when all of the local students had gone home, and most of them had gone home, unless it was football season. And in those early days, she became very close to Clemmy Allen, who was house mother of the Kappa Alpha Theta house. And they dearly, dearly loved each other. And every now and then, in fact, quite often, I was invited to lunch or dinner on one of those long weekend days or evenings. And oh my, what a wonderful respite that was. And as a tag-along with two extremely unique women, I just felt like I was so privileged and so honored. I always felt like I had a song in my heart when I was able to have lunch or dinner with the two of them and listening to their conversations. Of course, to me at that point, they were very old. And I thought and knew, of course, very wise. So it made it very, very special for me. And like all of us in this room, I stayed in touch with Dean Joan after I graduated. We chatted often. I would stop by her office when I was on campus to catch up and enjoy that cup of tea. And then when Chuck and I started our family, she became a very, very important part of our Christmas holidays for many, many years, spending Christmas Day with us. And she always came with tiny little treasures for our daughters that she had brought with her each year from her stay at Cambridge. And it was always kind of fun to see what they were, usually whimsical, very often something very spiritual or religious, but always something very, very, very special. Our daughters, Diane, Megan, and Kathleen, they're here today with my husband, so I know this is kind of bringing up a lot of memories for them too, called her Aunt Dean Joan. Not Dean Joan, Aunt Dean Joan. And it wasn't until they were in middle school that they suddenly realized that Dean wasn't her first name and Joan wasn't her last name. But she remained Aunt Dean Joan. As Jerry mentioned, her Christmas letters were treasures. They were to be read again and again, and each time you found something new and wonderful in them. They reflected her spiritual and her inner beauty. They reflected her appreciation of all things good and all things beautiful. She opened a window of her heart in those letters to all of us, those special, special greetings, and we read them with great joy and wonder. I love the picture of Dean Joan. I was kind of looking for it up here on her 93rd birthday. She was surrounded by flowers, wearing a striking pink hat, always a hat, but this one wasn't tan and it wasn't the black one we see back here, but it was bright, bright pink. Her long string of pearls on a brilliant blue suit. And of course, the beautiful smile that never left. She was always a delightful fashion statement with her scarves, her hats, and her unique style. And it was always her own unique style. Today, there are no deans of women and no deans of men at any university I know of. And I think that universities and the students are poorer for not having them. Dean Joan became the dean of everyone, which is reflected by the number of not only women, but men here today. Her door was open to all. Her heart was open to all. She is probably one of the few and one of the last special gifts to all students. An open door, an understanding heart. We'll never see the likes of her again. She was a gift to all of us. Dean Joan, our advisor, our mentor, our confidant, our champion, our friend. Helen Keller once said, "So long as the memory of a certain beloved friend lives in my heart, I shall say that life is good." The memory of Dean Joan lives in all of our hearts, and life is good. Thank you.
was just lamenting having to follow that. Joan was a mentor, a role model, a surrogate mom, and yes, a muse. I hope some of you can appreciate the true meaning of that word. Speaking from a man's point of view, that pretty much sums up USC's Dean of Women in the 1970s. Dean Joan may have been the Dean of Women, but if you stop by her open door office pretty much any time, there was a 50-50 chance she had someone in her office that did not fit her job description. Back then, we were known as Joan's boys. I was lucky enough to be one of Joan's boys. There are several of us here tonight, and I think that I won't point you out, but I will say at my age in particular, it's nice to be back being a boy again. Yes, Joan liked her boys, and she liked her scotch. So for me, Joan was sort of part Auntie Mame, part maybe Mama Rose, and then part Joan of Arc, which is kind of the conflict in Joan that made it her really interesting. She was fashionable, she was erudite, she was educated, elegant, classy, edgy, and more than a little bit naughty, which ran completely counter to the awkward, poorly dressed, culturally deprived undergraduates that we men were in the 1970s, which is evidenced by any of the pictures you look at, having to do with our dress and our hair, which I miss. But Joan inspired all of us to be better informed, better dressed, better students, better children, better friends, better lovers, and better Trojans. She always had the Trojan spirit. When you were with Joan, you felt like $1 million, which is why so many of us followed her like the Pied Piper to her beloved Cambridge program. And for what we would properly call Joan's summer camp, she birthed it, she nurtured it, she oversaw the USC Cambridge program for over 40 years. She started taking USC students to Cambridge, as Jerry said, in the 1960s, and her last trip was in 2006, well into her 80s. And over the years, and it's so amazing that she retired in 1993 and she kept going every year in and year out, and Jerry and I would sit with her and say, "You don't have to go," and she had to go. But over the years, she personally curated every single person that went to Cambridge. And then she accompanied us, a delegation of nearly 2,000 USC students, to her home away from home. She would recruit students all year long, and then, if she wanted you to go, she made it very clear that you must go, even if you had a full-time job and student loans to pay off. She found a way to get you there. The summer of 1978 was my time to go, and the trip did not disappoint. Highlights included newfound friends from all over the world, dining at tables in a room that looked a lot like Hogwarts, potatoes with every meal, and Joan's insistence that we attend every single cultural event that was at our disposal, particularly every organ recital you could possibly think of. Always followed by a pub crawl. Some of the best memories of Cambridge include those pub crawls and the Three Horseshoes, if anybody remembers that place. And it was a special place and a special time. And even though it was always a little bit gray, and even though we were always the ones caught climbing over the wall after 10 o'clock when we were supposed to be in, she was there to support us and make sure that we got what we went to Cambridge for. In many ways, Joan's connectivity between USC and Cambridge preordained, I think, the current trend here at USC of residential colleges, a long-held tradition at Cambridge where professors live among the students and often share copious amounts of tea and sherry at impromptu salons late into the evening. I think that's a really great new tradition here at USC, and I think we can attribute some of that to Joan. She made us all feel the same love she had for every detail of Cambridge. And I can still remember, like it was yesterday, the look on her face as some of her boys and I punted her along the cam, and she stared out at King's College Chapel from the river, taking in every single architectural detail and pointing them out to you. But mostly, I think what she was doing was absorbing the very spirit of the place. Joan was a fixture in Cambridge for so many years that upon her retirement, Selwyn College fittingly named a garden in her honor, in the honor of her longstanding commitment to both the university and its connection to USC. For Joan, Cambridge was perfection. But perhaps what I remember best about Joan is that she accepted all of our imperfections. She reveled in all of our complexities and all of our faults and mistakes, alternately supporting us and guiding us while pointing out every poor choice we made. But mostly I'll remember Joan's gaze. With her one good eye, she was mesmerizing, and she was hard to take your eyes off of. She was one of those people who could block out everything else that was going on in the room and feel like you were the only one that mattered. She scanned your face just as she did King's College, drinking in every ounce of you. And that's the Joan I remember and will remember, the one resting in peace, having absorbed the very spirit of every single one of us. Thank you.
It just keeps getting harder and harder to go after people. I'm going to do my best, though. Probably, as is true for most of us here, I first met Joan when I was in college at USC. For me, it was 1979 when I started college, and I was I was 77 when I started, but it was 79 when I met her, and I was 20 years old. I was a student in USC's semester program in Washington, D.C. Joan had traveled from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., as is her way, to learn more about the program so that she could better advise students about what the program was all about. And she visited our weekly seminar. Like scores of students before me and after me, I was immediately drawn to this very articulate, erudite, and elegant, yes, I'm going to use that word that someone else has used, woman, who frankly, I also found a little intimidating. I perceived that many of my fellow students already knew and adored their Dean Joan, and I hoped this would one day be true for me. However, it wasn't until about a year later, as a participant along with Brian Lord, who's going to speak next, in USC's Cambridge summer program, that I really got to know her. Joan attended classes with us, the theater, punting expeditions, she was still punting, and pubs, indeed. She invited us to her living quarters to join her for a glass of sherry and a discussion of the day's lectures, our career goals, our personal struggles, or simply the physical beauty of Cambridge. Some of these were echoing each other in our statements. I was also touched by Joan's leadership as a longtime sponsor of the Mortarboard Honor Society at USC, where she enhanced the generations of us, many of us who are in the audience today, USC student leaders. As Mortarboard president in 1981, I was able to learn leadership skills from her approach to addressing this thorny issue of whether our chapter should, in future years, have both men as well as women members. What I recall is that she explained the challenge to our group of about 20 remarkable women, and then let us decide what to do. In giving this choice to us, she empowered us to own our organization and to make the well-thought-out decision to be more inclusive. Her passion for the beautiful in life was expansive and unending. She loved classical music, the visual arts, literature, culture, and travel. Her sophisticated understanding and of love for the art was infectious, and I think it lit a lifelong spark in so many of us. Even when her memory was seriously challenged in the last few years of her life, for many of those years, she was still able to truly enjoy music. She attended her beloved LA Philharmonic and found great joy in that music. At each concert, she would read the program carefully, share what was most interesting, and quickly become enraptured by the sound of the music. Attending concerts with her, I can also attest she ever remained a celebrity all of those years, often running into former adoring students who immediately recognized their beloved Dean Joan. It's hard to speak for about 5 minutes about someone who I was fortunate enough to have first as a mentor and a role model, and then a very, very close friend, and really family for almost 40 years. But because I have followed in Joan's footsteps with a career as an educator in a university setting, I want to end with a few comments on this subject. Joan was an intellectual light for so many of us at USC. She was never technically our professor, but she was always our teacher. She taught us by example how to love learning and be constantly intellectually curious about music, art, literature, and life. She also encouraged us to be appropriately critical and not accept answers that didn't ring true. She told us to face life with integrity. She taught us how to give love, and she also taught us how to receive it. As many of you know, and as Jerry mentioned, Joan had a love for bonsai trees, and for many years had a garden full of them at her home in the Hollywood Hills. She was a master gardener of those plants, tending them with utmost care, sometimes providing water or fertilizer, or in some cases, a much-needed pruning. Joan was also a master gardener of her students, an artist at listening to each of the hundreds of us in this room and others. She recognized each of us as unique individuals and learned about our passions, our skills, and our needs, providing the best possible support to enable us to grow and flourish. Growing students into fully formed, caring, and successful adults was her greatest art form, one at which she was a master.
Hi, I'm Brian Lord. I'm woefully unprepared, as I was when I met her. Jerry, I think, is the person that introduced me to her, and the odds of me not crying are pretty slim to none, so forgive me ahead of time. But Jerry, as with many of you, was one of the first people I met at USC, and I can't describe how dumb I was when I met him. I was from a small town in Louisiana. I didn't know it was a private university. I didn't know anything about where it was or just how far away from what my existence I was on a physical level and on a completely intellectual and emotional level. So soon after I started, somehow I met Jerry, and Jerry said, "You got to meet this woman. Her name's Joan Schaefer. She's the Dean of Women at USC, and I just want you to go and see her." And I thought, oh my God, he knows I lied on my application. I'm getting thrown out of this school. I'm going to have to tell my parents I lied, which I did, and it was just a kind of disaster inside my brain that I've often experienced. So it's something I needed to get used to, obviously. But I showed up in the office that many of you showed up in, and I was immediately struck by the books and the paintings and the color of light coming out of lamps and her auburn hair and the dramatic pixie cut that I hadn't seen before, coming from a small town in Louisiana. And she, on her desk was a story that she surprised me with that I'd written to get into school. And it was a story about my great-grandfather. And somehow she connected with this story and decided I was Faulkner. She didn't know, I didn't know who Faulkner was. I'm not kidding. She adopted me the way she adopted so many of us in a crazy, selfless way. And And as I got to know her over the years, I couldn't get a story out of her. I couldn't get a story out of her about her eye. I couldn't get a story out of her about her broken marriage. She just refused to tell me anything about her life. She just wanted to know about mine and what I was learning, who I was dating, what I was exposing myself to in terms of books and movies and traveling. And this went on for years in a way that I thought, I'm, the luckiest guy to ever show up. And then you come here today, and we all have a version of the same story. She created some bizarre, magical world that she was able to involve us all in and make us feel like we were alone and that it was special, and yet it was her life's work. She taught me about the arts in a way that I didn't know there was such a thing. I knew about Cajun music, and I knew about storytellers, and I knew about musical theater and church singing, and that was the extent of it. I didn't really know anything else. I didn't know the difference between vinyl and leather. I didn't know there were different colors blue. She told me these things on long walks in Cambridge. A really crazy night walking home from a pub. I think I was drunker, but I'm not sure. And it was, on one of those walks, and I remember it so well, that she actually said, the arts aren't a hobby. They're not something you do after work. They're not something you do once a month. They're something you can live. Who knew? And I completely credit her with finding my life for me, finding my family, finding what I became. And it's just nice to be here with you all. Thank you. She's an amazing woman.
Good afternoon. I'm David Chaco, and this is my brother Jacob. We both graduated from USC, myself in 2004 and my brother in 2000. During our time here, we got to know Dean Joan quite well as Dean Joan scholars, as well as through the summer abroad Cambridge trip that we've heard a lot about today.
It's in that context that we were invited by Jerry to say a few words today. And it's an incredible privilege for both of us to stand here in front of you to share with you what Dean Joan meant to us and to honor her incredible life.
In preparing to give these remarks, I found my essay from 2002 when I applied to be a Dean Joan Scholar. The prompt for that essay was to describe our continuous love of learning. And as everyone who knows Dean Joan can attest, she had a profound love of learning and sought to engender that same desire in each of her students. Could we ask the Dean Joan scholars who are in the audience to please stand to be acknowledged so that we can honor Dean Joan's legacy?
As you've just seen, Dean Joan left a living legacy of students whose lives she directly impacted. All told, over 320 USC undergraduates were awarded a Dean Joan Scholarship since it was established in 1993. If you wander over the wall of scholars at Levy Library, you'll see an inscription about the scholarship that describes it as being awarded to students who have demonstrated, through scholarly excellence, a continuous love of learning. But I would amend that inscription. Whatever continuous love of learning we, the Dean Joan scholars, may have demonstrated prior to receiving the scholarship pales in comparison to the ravenous and voracious love of learning that we all exhibit to this day after our direct interactions with Dean Joan.
In my essay to become a Dean Joan Scholar, I wrote about how I naively came to USC thinking that college would narrow my interests and focus me on a single career path. Probably a little naive. Instead, as was probably the case with many of you, my choices expanded. Under the mentorship of great USC leaders like Dean Joan, my eyes were opened to entirely new vantage points.
David and I both came to USC wanting to be physicians, but learned about new fields and about other ways to positively impact the world around us. We volunteered in organizations on and off campus, not only because it was the right thing to do, but because USC, and in particular, mentors like Dean Joan, taught us the value of engaging with the community around this campus and in learning from everyone's perspectives.
We both used our Dean Joan scholarships to attend the Cambridge summer session with Dean Joan, and this continued to expand our horizons. I took a course on John Milton's poem, Paradise Lost, in the same city where Milton himself was a student roughly 400 years earlier. We went punting on the Cam River, and I remember one situation in particular where Dean Joan, myself, and my friend Susie were in the center of Cambridge and were walking back to our college residence. Susie and I started to walk back along the main road, which would have been a 10-minute walk. Dean Joan stopped us, and with a smile on her face, she told us, "Ha, you two don't know the right way back. Come with me." She then led us on a 45-minute stroll through the most beautiful British countryside. We literally stopped and smelled the roses. And it's because of Dean Joan that even now, nearly 15 years later, I still remember to slow down and enjoy a peaceful stroll, both figuratively and literally.
Dean Joan's love of learning wasn't limited to science or the arts or books or paintings. She was curious about literally everything, and that curiosity was infectious. She so profoundly influenced David and me that after we both graduated from USC, our parents invited Dean Joan to our house for a home-cooked meal. We originally planned a mixed menu of American and Italian fare, worried that Indian food might be too spicy for Dean Joan. When I told her our plan, Dean Joan just about bit my head off. And she informed me very matter-of-factly that she could handle her spice. So we switched to an Indian menu. To this day, I don't know whether Dean Joan truly enjoyed that spicy food. But I do know that she nearly out-ate both David and me that night. More importantly, she asked about the specifics of the spices that were used and in what proportions, and about the flavor profile. She was just so curious. Now, we have a running joke in the Chaco household that Dad, a retired executive and engineer, is quantitative and analytical about his cooking. But Mom had done most of the cooking that night. And Mom, as a retired ER physician, takes what I'll call more of an intuitive and rapid-fire, let's just get this done approach to cooking. And so she honestly didn't know the exact spice proportions she had used or the flavor profile she had used, and I'm pretty sure that she bluffed her way through most of Dean Joan's questions that night. That night remains one of our family's fondest memories of Dean Joan.
Because of the time that we spent in Cambridge as part of Dean Joan's summer program, my brother and I both fell in love with England. We both returned to Oxford for graduate study on Marshall scholarships after graduating from USC. From there, we got to learn more about the UK and Europe, and for that matter, the rest of the world. We both continued to expand our horizons, to pursue our love of learning, as Dean Joan would describe it. We began to see additional paths for our careers. Instead of becoming physicians, as we both entered USC thinking we would become, we decided to pursue MDs and MBAs. And we're now both on the business side of healthcare. Jacob as CFO of a NASDAQ-listed oncology company that's developing precision medicines for aggressive cancers.
And David as a healthcare venture capitalist, investing in early-stage companies to develop new treatments and cures for patients. While we both still believe medicine is a noble profession, and Dean Joan reminded us of that often, we feel incredibly blessed to be able to work in our current fields bringing life-saving technologies to patients.
Jacob and I both strongly believe that the mentorship we received here at USC, and specifically the guidance and the friendship of Dean Joan, helped us to see where we could make our mark and where we could help the largest number of people.
This incredible woman that we honor today encouraged us to pursue what we loved, to expand our horizons, and to always think about those around us.
And perhaps equally as importantly, she taught us to slow down and smell the roses. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Many of you here today honoring our Aunt Joan. I live in Massachusetts now, so I say aunt, but I will go back and forth, aunt. And many of you here today honoring our Aunt Joan probably grew up in a family of cousins and the family of aunts and uncles who created those cousins. Things were a bit out of the norm in our family, as my brothers and I often found ourselves explaining to others we had no cousins. And that would take them a minute to figure out how that could be. And then we would explain we had only one aunt. But then our aunt was Aunt Joan. When we were children, it seemed no one else had an aunt like ours. College graduate, lifelong student of the arts, independent and cosmopolitan for sure. In our family, we always knew that with only one aunt, we were more than blessed. In the Metcalf family memory album is a large photo of Aunt Joan in the early 1950s, arriving at Toledo Express Airport. She's bending over my older brother Tom, her arms scooped around him, both looking straight into my grandpa's camera. One of the many times Aunt Joan brought her amazing presents to Toledo. Imagine the aura made greater as the only person we knew who came to visit us by airplane. A bit of celebrity in our lives for sure. She arrived from California. Aunt Joan brought the treasured gift that many of you spoke about today, the gift of being all in when she visited you, making time for each member of the family, and always asking questions that were all about you. Perhaps made easier because she was not tending to her own children when she came to visit. She was truly all ours. But you had to be ready for her visits. Yes, Richard? She expected much of you, and her questions challenged. Her visits were not always easy, and they always included a trip to the Toledo Museum of Art. We think when we lose someone, they are gone, but our five senses keep them close. I smell her Shalimar and Chanel No. 5. I see some ladies' heads nodding. Hearing, well, that would be the sound of the zipper in our tent. Yes, Richard? When Aunt Joan went out in Yellowstone Park and the bear was at the table. And no sooner did the zipper go up, but the zipper went down. And then the zipper went up and she was back in. Now take a minute and try to imagine camping with Aunt Joan. We had a brook behind one of our homes in Massachusetts, and she was ecstatic that she could go canoeing with us one day. Our daughter was more than perplexed when Aunt Joan came down the stairway wearing a skirt. Our five senses see, sight. I see her hands, our father's hands, and sometimes my hands. I treasure the photo of Aunt Joan at 14, holding her bow and violin in her lap, my eye ever drawn to her hands. Other than sharing the auburn hair, seeing that photo given to me when I was 14 by our grandmother, that was the first time I remember feeling the connection. The sense of touch, again, her hands. Hugs, of course. And taste. I think David and Jacob covered that pretty well. Aunt Joan would savor and taste food like no one I ever knew, slowly. As children, we just ate. I was able to know Aunt Joan in a new way when I grew up and married Terry, a sailor stationed in San Diego. We were engaged rather quickly after meeting, and when Terry went back to California to the base, I instructed Terry's first task was to get on his motorcycle and bike up to LA to meet Aunt Joan. He had no idea what awaited him. And how could I explain it? Like another parent, though, I suppose I needed to know that she loved him as much as I. And she did, of course, in the way she loved everyone. She finds the heart of who you are and celebrates you, does she not? For years now, I've had an article in a desk drawer, saved for such a day. It begins, "What, besides genetics, makes some women thrive well into their 90s and others die young or fall victim to disease?" The article describes the 17-year research of David Snowden, author of Aging with Grace, and it notes that those who age best share optimism, gratitude, and engagement in a variety of intellectual challenges. Most touching to me in the article is this passage. I know you'll connect. Nuns whose writing samples from their 20s contained cognitive complexity, meaning many ideas expressed in one sentence, were much healthier in their 80s and 90s than those women whose prose was simpler. I'm guessing no examples of Aunt Joan's writing, complex as it was, are needed in this audience today. I know many of you have a treasured Joan letter or a Christmas anthem saved, and you join me in saying, cognitive complexity. Yes, that's Joan. That's the Joan I knew. The key to living long and living well, and Aunt Joan did. I treasure every sentence of cognitive complexity that Aunt Joan gave me over the years. The letters live in a hat box ready to bring her to life again in my hands. X, 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 over O, 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 O. If you got one too, you can join me, equals LOVE. She would always write. Aunt Joan's life here with us has ended, but I imagine for many of you, as for my family, the conversations have certainly not. I will always miss the letters arriving in the mail. We lost that some time ago. But when I open the hat box, I will always know that having only one aunt was more than enough. Thank you.
Aunt Joan lived her life as if indifference was her enemy. She was passionately involved in life, her life, your life, and my life. Due to distance, my family never had the chance to share with her the joys of daily living. But when she was with us, it was always special and always memorable. We always looked forward to her visits. She was magical, she was exuberant, she was devoted. It would be hard to isolate one area of my family's life where her impact was greatest. The sum of her influence was encompassing. Aunt Joan's commitment to the arts and global humanity made conversations gratifying and affirming. She listened, encouraged, and inspired us to be our best and to see the best in life and our world. She validated us as people and parents and encouraged and inspired us to stand firm in our commitments. We can all be certain that one person can truly make a difference. Aunt Joan is proof. Most memorable for me were the talks Joan and I had, sharing our love of music and the great joy it brought us both. Music was our bond, and if music unites, it certainly did us. I am proud to say that my daughters cherish and exemplify so much of what Joan valued. In them, I see Joan's love of life, her intelligence and thirst for understanding, and her abundant ability to give and inspire. I know that if my brother Tom was still with us, he would have shared his own special words. And I don't know exactly what would have been said, but I can be certain that within his text would be words, thank you, for all she did for him and for us. We can all be thankful to Joan for what she brought to our lives, the impact her presence had on our choices and ability to move forward, to grow as intellectual and enlightened human beings is the reason we're all gathered here today. For this, as her family, we will forever feel love and gratitude. We are so grateful to you, her USC family, for extending to my family the opportunity to share this celebration of her life. Her body has left us, but her spirit, her deep and abiding love for education, her belief in enlightenment and pursuit of excellence, her devotion to the betterment of humanity, and passion, and so much passion for the arts will remain her legacy on this campus and in all our hearts. Thank you for sharing these moments with us and embracing us so warmly.
Okay. Once my eyes start leaking, they don't stop. My great Aunt Joan was really great. She was the world, and I always felt like I was in hers when she was with us. Her passion for life was magical. When she walked through the door, I knew places and people and cultures and my beloved books that were everything to me as a child would become real through the stories she shared with me and my sister of everything that she did in her life. We shared a love of history and the arts and so many wonderful things. Thank you. It was these wonderful exchanges in my childhood that brought me to museum education and the wonderful world I have lived in for so many years. My job is to bring people, objects, and places to life that seem so far away, and to tell that story to others, just like she did for me when I was a child. Every time I create and present an educational program that focuses on art or history or even the environment, I hear her voice in my head. And of course, it's in French. Aunt Joan and I shared a really amazing love for French culture. We used to talk about the art and the history and the architecture. And when I started taking the language in school, she started writing to me in French so that I could practice. So, Aunt Joan, je t'aime, longtemps, au revoir.
Oh, I will probably have to read this, as I don't think I can make it through it if I don't. It is very important for girls as they grow up to have a strong and inspiring woman to serve as a role model. I am lucky enough to have had several women serve in these roles. One of those remarkable women for me happens to be my great Aunt Joan, a very inspiring and encouraging woman. My great aunt encouraged and inspired me to pursue all of my loves, which many times were also hers, from my love of the violin to my love of traveling and exploring the world and my pursuit of education. I could go on forever on those things, but I'm going to skip ahead to something that, since you touched on a lot of that, that is something that connects us and will connect us for life. The opportunity to attend college was something that was extremely important to myself and my family. I remember during my college search having conversations between myself, and Aunt Joan, and my parents. She was extremely encouraging and supporting, even when I told her I didn't know what I wanted to do. Growing up, I had always known my great Aunt Joan was someone at USC who impacted the lives of students. However, I didn't fully understand until I was a college student myself. When I was a first year at Bowling Green State University, I discovered the impact a faculty or staff member can have on a student through advising. I decided quickly after that to major in Russian education and get involved as much as possible on campus. I loved to share stories with my great aunt about what I was studying, what classes I was taking, what opportunities I was going to have to go abroad, and what I was involved in. She was someone who truly understood. I was a lucky one who realized early on in undergrad that I wanted to go into higher education and follow in the footsteps of one of my role models. Oh, sorry. I wanted to help college students learn, develop, and grow, just as the beloved Dean Joan had done for hundreds of students here at USC. I remember sharing with my great aunt my career goals and desire to work in higher education. And she shared with me her excitement over the phone to have me follow in her legacy. Being a part of Joan's legacy is something I reflect on regularly. She was a woman who served as a mentor, advisor, teacher, and so much more to hundreds of people. She impacted many individuals, many of you all here, as they navigate college, trying to figure out their passions and how to achieve their goals. I hope during my career as a professional in student affairs that I am living up to her legacy. I hope during my career working with college students that I'm able to make even half the impact on my students' lives that she has made on hers. Aunt Joan, thank you for being such an important and inspiring woman in my life. Thank you for showing me unconditional love and support. Thank you for being one of my role models. I'm so, so proud to have followed in your footsteps and have such a remarkable woman as my great aunt. I love you and miss you dearly, and a piece of you will always be in my heart.
Good afternoon. Dean Joan and I actually talked about this day a fair number of times. And so I want to be very respectful to what she wanted me to talk about. First, she would want you to know that memories are very, very important, but that dreams are far, far more important. And I think you heard from the people that were before me, she really did make people's dreams come true. And I hope that we can remember that and kind of live up to that. I wanted to really try to synthesize everything we heard today with kind of 3 questions that I know Joan asked herself, and I know we will all ask ourselves as we get to a later place in life. Did we live? Did we love? Did we leave a legacy? With Joan Schaefer, it's unambiguous. She did all 3. It's not even a close call. She lived. You heard from everyone. She illuminated us. She illuminated our minds. There was no limit on her curiosity. There was no limit on the disciplines that she was interested in. She illuminated both the awesome and the ordinary. She looks at things differently than almost every other person I've ever met. She was the ultimate interdisciplinarian. I still can't look at fireworks, gardens, or fashion without thinking about her, but also thinking about the important components, whether it's fashion and history, whether it's biology and gardens, whether it's fireworks and chemistry. She brought all those things to life. She loved. She touched us. You heard from every speaker. She touched our hearts. There's a famous Talmudic saying which says, "What comes from the heart enters the heart." We all know she entered our hearts. Very few people do that. She knew how to love. And there are so many stories, but one simple one I'll give you was my mother-in-law had Alzheimer's for 15 years, and it was, as you all know, it's a degrading illness. And Joan was visiting with her one day, and she hadn't spoken in some number of years. And Joan just sat with her and held her. She held those famous hands. And she looked her in the eye, and for the first time in many years, there was a sparkle in my mother-in-law's eyes. And it was clearly Joan. It was the spirit of Joan who was loving her. Her legacy. She inspired us, our souls. She inspired confidence in us, allowing us to live large. You heard from the speakers before me, they've all lived large. She anchored us in a topsoil of trust, which allowed us to branch out beyond ourselves. That trust led to relationships. The relationships led to possibilities, and most importantly, the possibilities led to action. Joan took the golden rule to scale through all of us. The grace that she ultimately brought to us was the life lesson that our souls would be constantly nurtured if we watched out and helped one another. Many of the people in this room have been very generous of spirit, of time, of resources with Joan over the last number of years. But I wanted to make sure that two deserve special mention because they were with her until the very end. One was Lorraine, her loving caretaker, which Jerry has mentioned to you. And importantly, Jerry has been her devoted guardian. There's very few people in the world I've ever seen that have truly had a devoted guardian. And she compelled the guardianship, but she absolutely deserved it, and Jerry absolutely loved her. Joan shared her heart, her mind, and her soul with all of us. To honor and preserve her legacy, we must continue that tradition of living and loving and caring for one another. Thank you.
Let's have another round of applause for our student. Well, the end of our program today, but we'll always remember her. So please, thank you all for coming. Please enjoy the rest of the afternoon here. We have a little memorabilia tables if you get a chance to take a look and see a little memory of Joan. But thank you all for coming, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.